Welcome to Krome Cast. Check it out. I'm Sam Major, Commercial Director for Krome Technologies. I'm joined once again by Ben Randall, Technical Director for Krome Technologies. This is our first podcast for 2022, and today we're looking at or talking about the Log4j vulnerability, the impact that's had on people, what it is, what it meant, and what it could mean for the future. Ben, welcome.
Hi Sam, thanks for having me.
No problem. I guess before we dive into some of the more detail of it, very basic in layman's terms so that I can understand it. What is Log4j? And I've heard the term Log4j or Log4Shell. So kind of what is it and what was the vulnerability it created?
Okay, so fundamentally Log4j2 is a library that lives within Apache software, which is used in a lot of applications. It's not just you've got an Apache web server, it's there, it's used for passing messaging and logging within applications. So from an architectural point of view, it has access to a lot of other parts of the software that it's integrated in.
Lots of dependencies.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay. It has access to a lot of things within the architecture, and so it's quite central to a lot of stuff. It's able to pass messages and receive messages and so on.
Yeah.
So what has happened is that there's been a vulnerability has been discovered in that library by a researcher at Alibaba actually in November last year.
Yeah.
So that vulnerability, I think, was detected in a Minecraft server, and goodness knows what he was actually doing during his day job. But anyway, that's another question.
Not his day job.
In any case, what happens is that there's this vulnerability which has given rise to an exploit which is known as Log4j Shell, which essentially, by sending the right kind of request to an exposed system which has Log4j library on it, means that it can then provide greater access to the system. So you give via the exploit you can gain shell level access to the system.
How does it do that then? So if I'm a hacker, someone nefarious, etc., we've learned of this vulnerability stroke function, I guess, actually within Log4j and what it does. How do I exploit that?
I don't know the exact intricacies of it, but I believe that it's
That's because you're a good guy, not a hacker.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, yeah. So basically, by passing a carefully crafted LDAP request, it can then pass back access to the system.
Understood.
It was an unintended behaviour.
Yeah.
But by having the system which is running Log4j exposed to the internet, then that became available. That hack was there, and that was being actively exploited before, literally, we believe before it was even officially discovered and patched. So, it's a pretty straightforward attack as well. It's not highly technical. It doesn't require internal access. So if the system's available on the internet, someone can try and exploit that.
You can see that it's a standard LDAP request.
Pretty much, yeah.
So that's not that I could do it, but it doesn't sound too technical given some of the intelligence that goes into kind of a cyber threat, etc. these days.
Absolutely, yeah. It was rated a 10 out of 10 on the risks on the CVSS scale. So basically means that it gives a high level of access and it's easily exploited. Yeah. Okay.
And this, my understanding is, this is everything. This is Linux, this is Windows, this is Apple, so iOS included. The only thing I've read, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that my Android phone should be okay, but everyone else is in trouble.
Open to debate, yeah. So basically it's a Java piece of Java software which is used cross-platform. It's used.
Not necessarily that safe then. Okay.
It's used in a lot of different areas, and so there are literally thousands upon thousands of affected systems, and of all different types.
Okay, so we were talking thousands, millions of instances that this vulnerability could be out there, and people exposed to this vulnerability. We now, or Apache, have released a few fixes to address this, but I guess prior, I know because obviously we're in communication with our customers that had the vulnerability before the patches were released. What did we do to help protect them, protect ourselves, etc., using technology that we have before kind of Apache came up with their fix to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, Apache came out actually with, I believe, 4 fixes so far, because they had a fix, then that didn't patch it entirely, and that's the trouble with these rapid, you know, you've got to get this out the door quick kind of patches. Sometimes they introduce their own errors, but I think that was just a case of there was more to it each time, and they found out about that. But obviously, there's securing your perimeter, via your firewall to not allow requests or LDAP requests coming in from the outside. You know, when is that legitimate, really, if you think about it? So I won't say a next-gen firewall, but an application-aware firewall with correctly configured rules can obviously limit that exposure. Plus, also it's fairly easy to detect the attack, you know, the exploit being used, and so for example, in the Palo Alto firewalls that we normally use, there are vulnerability profiles which have applied to that traffic, and so they look for that for traffic trying to exploit that.
So were they seeing that prior to I guess Apache knowing they had, or that someone could use the function within it as to exploit and use it as a vulnerability? Would Palo have seen that prior, or was that?
In fairness, because if the vulnerability is, you know, the exploit is unknown, then you don't have, you know, there's no reference to that. Obviously, having rules configured so that those LDAP requests wouldn't come in, that would have produced, by implication, that would have protected it. But yeah, absolutely. We saw and still see many attempts to, you know, people scanning for that vulnerability. That was the primary thing we saw, rather than specific attacks. It was just like, we'll just note down where we, you know, where the doors are open a chink. You know, we can try and exploit that later. I think that's the thing.
Interesting. Okay, so obviously Apache have hopefully brought fixes to the table that resolve it. Hand in glove, obviously we've used the functionality built into Palo Altos. Am I right in thinking that? And obviously, this is a product that we use. Other products are available.
Yes.
But you know, Tenable, for instance, would spot.
Absolutely, yes. So vulnerability scans. So from various providers, that it's a known issue now. So you can scan. I mean, this is half the problem. You've got a library which is used by many bits of software. You've got companies which have got many bits of software, some with it, some without, and it's obviously. The primary thing is the software you know about that you're using. You need to contact your vendor to get patches for that, because there's going to be an element of, we can't just patch this vulnerability on its own. It might break the system that relies on it. You know, upgrading the version of Java and all that sort of thing can be quite disruptive. So, but also then you can also launch your own independent scans to try and find software which you may not have thought of. You know, there's always a bit of, I wouldn't call shadow IT, but IT that's not terribly well documented, that you've got inside the larger environment, the more likely you are to have it. There'll be something in there. All
those different dependencies, like you say, it's doing a lot of logging for a lot of different things. So there's probably things you will be aware, but maybe not thought of that it's associated with or dependent on.
Yes,
so that's
absolutely.
why such far-reaching implications. Yeah. And the bit you mentioned there about kind of leaving the door ajar, that's, to my mind, and I could be wrong, but you know, it does seem that potentially, have we seen the impact of this in totality as yet, or are people kind of putting out those packets, those payloads, and waiting?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, that this Log4j shell just gets you in the door, doesn't do anything more than that. But once you're in, you can put a payload in, which possibly could remain dormant, or could be used immediately, depending on who that is. You know, I think if you've got a system which was available publicly on the internet, wasn't patched, and there wasn't a mitigation to actually actively prevent that access, you kind of have to assume that it's probably been breached.
Yeah. And
so you need to really treat it accordingly. So that is that's a real headache.
I was about to say, because if that's, where do you even start with that?
Well, I think the thing to do, as with anything which you consider to be breached, you need to do the usual scans, vulnerability scans on it. Obviously, patch the system. But you need to look for any other anomalous behaviour. So depending, you may have tools which look for that.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the sort of the XDR type products, which look for unusual behaviour.
So that's post kind of, probably the wrong word, but let's say detonation. Detonate the payload, that's where XDR is going to go, okay, now,
absolutely, yeah.
now it's kind of known and unusual, that will shut it down. Prior to that, we'd have to use, I'm assuming, kind of, I use the term loosely, but AI, machine learning, stuff like dark trace that would have picked up on the LDAP request and so on, and alerted us that we would call it at that point rather than the point of an execution.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you've got something like dark trace, there's a good chance it will have picked up something anomalous. In the case of well, that just doesn't look normal. You know, an LDAP request coming in and going to this server, which doesn't normally serve LDAP requests.
Yeah.
So that kind of mitigation, that kind of product in place, really protects you against those kind of the unknown. You know, because prior to sort of December or November, we didn't really know anything about this. You know, it just came from nowhere.
But that unusual behaviour element would have been picked up by something like a dark trace, because, like you say, that's an outside of the norm. We shouldn't be having handshakes with servers outside there.
Yeah, certainly that should at least be flagged up as anomalous.
Yeah.
And then any further linked behaviour to that would raise further red flags.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess, assuming that things are okay and but that Apache is patched and that's now protected, we really are focusing on the people that potentially didn't get there early enough and now have something in the environment that we should focus on. So I guess that's now a combination of things like a Cortex or another zero-day protection, something that is doing the network analytics. So dark trace.
Yeah.
We're
looking at those next-gen kind of products really to protect you from essentially what could be essentially a zero-day just sitting dormant in your system. I mean, there's a chance that whatever they've put there, if they've just kept a low profile, that as soon as it activates, it will get flagged up because it's no longer really a zero-day. It's aged. You know, so there's an element of that. But you kind of the limits of the extent of this is I won't say limitless, but very wide reach.
This could roll on for a while.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say you haven't made those investments in, let's call them next gen technologies, and you've got your standard antivirus and potentially a non-application where firewall, etc., etc. And you've had the vulnerabilities. There's a good chance something is going on, right?
I think you have to approach it from a pessimistic point of view. For sure. Yeah.
Okay. So what would our advice be to people that may find themselves in that unfortunate situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose to treat with caution. I suppose is that primarily is to make sure you've got the thing patched as per the vendor requirements. You know, the vendor advice, and then use whatever tools you do have to scan for anything that may be there. You know, because literally, it's not like we're looking for one kind of infection after this. It's just a vulnerability which has been used, and once that's been used and they've got they're in, that's not really important anymore. Even though you patched it, they've still got they potentially still got the access from the inside.
They're still in there. Not wanting to be pessimistic, but kind of picking up on a point you made earlier about being pessimistic. If I am someone watching this thinking, that potentially is my environment. I don't have next generation firewalls. I don't have detect and response capability. I don't have Tenable tools like this, etc. So I may be compromised. I guess, what can they do?
Right. Well, I mean, firstly, you need to look at the software you've got, apply the patches, as I said earlier, that your vendors have provided. Secondly, there are open source tools. There's like white source, Log4j detection utilities, like open source, so you can run that. So if you don't have a paid for product to look for vulnerabilities, you can actually run that, and it will look for this specific vulnerability. And then beyond that, you need to be looking at logs. Looking for unusual behaviour. So anything that flags up as being unusual is highly suspect around that system.
Take the time to dig into it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's what these tools generally do.
Yeah.
They're looking at logs, they're looking at unusual traffic and so on. So, at a basic level, if you were to look manually at that, you should see similar information. You know, obviously it's a bit harder work, but
and I guess just thinking on those lines, you know, we're talking about this potentially. We haven't maybe seen the zenith of this and what could happen. So I guess if you are in that position, potentially as an IT director, IT manager, speak to the business and talk about the importance of potentially investing in something that is a bit more, I guess, proactive in its capabilities to help you protect your business. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, as the threats evolve, so, you know, unfortunately the defences need to evolve as well. You know, we have to keep pace with this kind of thing. It's becoming more frequent and more far-reaching. You know, as everything's increasingly interdependent, then you know, things are a lot more at risk, and so we just have to consider, you know, the fallout from some of this as we depend on systems it can be really dramatic, really.
Terribly depressing. So on a happier note, you know, I guess the good thing is there are tools out there that can help. So with the right kind of advice and application, we can mitigate these risks, and hopefully, as best we can, try and keep ahead of people that are becoming far more clever day by day.
Absolutely. I mean, the communication about this was being very widespread as well. It was very rapid. You know, the information came out, patches are released as quickly as everyone could, really. And so I think all's been done, you know, on from the vendor's point of view, everyone's moved pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But, you know, as I sort of say, that still doesn't take away from the fact that people are trying to exploit it successfully in many cases, you know, across the world.
See how this one pans out, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you, Ben.
No, thanks for having me.
No worries. And thank you for joining us on the first episode of Krome Cast Tech It Out of 2022. As always, if there's any topic you'd like us to cover in more detail, then leave that in the comments below. Remember to like, subscribe and share. And join us again next time on Krome Cast. Tech It Out.